Hi everyone, and welcome for another AMA with us at the IGDA LocSIG. I'm Aurélie, your host today, and I'm a English to French video game translator. And today we will talk about game localization engineering or localization engineering in general. And for this, we have a super guest who is Katrina. So, Katrina, if you can introduce yourself.
Of course. Hi, my name is Katrina Leonoudakis. That's how you pronounce that, if you were wondering. I am a Japanese to English localization specialist. I've worn many hats. I am a translator, ADR writer, recently producer, localization engineer, of course. Yeah, I got my master's degree in translation from Kent State University back in 2016. Oh my goodness, what is time? And since then, I've done a lot of different work for different anime and manga companies. I worked at SEGA from 2017 till just this summer, doing everything from translating to project management. And then the bulk of my work there was localization engineering. And now I'm working at Deluxe in Hollywood, helping to coordinate the dubs of like Hollywood films and television shows. So yeah, really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being with us. So it's very an impressive background. Okay, I have the YouTube video that just froze over there and sent me off track. So yeah, I was saying you have a really impressive background, and you've had, like you said, different hats, and one of them was localization engineering, which is something that we don't really know about. We don't really study it at university. At least from what I know in France, that's not the case. And it's still something that we may see as freelancers, because if we work with direct client, we do have to do a bit of this. But I guess it's like a tiny bit. So can you like tell us a bit more about what it is actually, a localization engineering? What's behind this word?
Of course. So the engineering part from it comes from like a software engineering, which sounds scary, but really it's not. It basically means whatever like text you have for localization, doing something to it to make it either easier or work better with different cat tools you're using, or just facilitate the localization experience. I think we've all worked with texts or PDFs that are terribly formatted. You get it in, it's just a really rough blank scanned photo, or you've got a PDF where none of the text is selectable. So any kind of software tooling or processes you take using software to make that text easier or better to localize is localization engineering. So I think one tool we might be all very used to is like OCR on handwritten documents or like PDFs and whatnot. Using OCR is localization engineering. You are using a process to make it easier for you to localize. So that's kind of the gist of it. So it can be everything as simple as like using OCR or doing some different formatting in an Excel sheet, using formulas to do character count or word count. And then you can get very complicated up till when you're programming full scale like project management systems, using like the MemoQ API to interact with a script that'll do all sorts of stuff for you on the back end. And yeah, no, it's a really interesting field, a very cool cross of like computer and software engineering with obviously localization, because the localization experience you have will help you understand the needs of the linguists, or, you know, in our case, like game developers, and see how we can create tools or processes that help kind of link those two worlds a lot more seamlessly.
Okay, so yeah, it's a bit technical. Would you say that it's great as a translator to kind of have a techie side, like to not being afraid to dive into your softwares, or maybe better understand how your computer works? Just that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even some of the more basic things like understanding how to do certain things in Word, especially Excel. I mean, anyone who's working in game dev or localization has had to do stuff in Excel for localization. Even just having a little bit of that knowledge for like how to do conditional formatting or how to write a formula to count all the words and whatnot. Those little things can be so incredibly helpful to you, and save you a lot of work. Obviously, not every translator needs to start picking up a programming language, but I think especially in our world, because all the stuff we do is on the computer, having that knowledge can help not only make it easier for you to do your job, but if you do your job faster, then you get money faster. And it's a great skill to have kind of boost, I don't say like your own revenue or your own like how much you can do per hour.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And what kind of, I mean, not really skills, but maybe is there any tools that we can start to learn to get into this? For example, like to maybe get more comfortable just handling our files on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think instead of talking about specific tools, I think it's best to talk more about like the processes, because like the processes you want to facilitate, like make easier for you and whatnot. I think while we're working on projects, we all have like one process where we're like, why do I have to spend 8 hours copy pasting this, or why do I have to spend all this time like trying to find out what the character count is? And a lot of the time, especially when we're working with devs, we have to email the devs back saying like, hey, I need you to give me a full change log, or I need you to give me this, and sometimes we can't get that from the developers because they're already so busy fighting their own fires. So I think what's best, what really helped me, especially as I got into localization engineering at SEGA, was thinking about like where are the pain points in the processes, and is there anything that we can do to make that better? And 9 out of 10 times, there is some sort of engineering solution that you can do. Whether it is, finding better OCR software that doesn't require as much like fine tuning, or for changelog, maybe writing a very quick Python script to take 2 Excel files and spit out a list of everything that's changed. It may not be pretty, and you don't need to go into it thinking, oh, I need to make it like super nice. I need to have a whole graphical interface. Like that's not necessary. Really, what you're doing is kind of creating a tool to solve a problem. So you don't have to tear your hair out about it.
Okay, yeah, I think like maybe I don't know. I think for devs it will be okay, but for translators, I can already see them afraid, like with ideas of using Excel with formulas sometimes, or like you say, creating a tool. It sounds a bit scary, but is it really hard, or is there anything easy that you can learn?
Yeah, I think, and I absolutely understand like the whole feeling like, oh, it must be so hard. I can't write code for this. What if I break this? What if we break that? Like the great thing, like especially if you're freelancing, the great thing is like as long as you make a copy of something, you can do whatever you want to that copy, and as long as the original is still there somewhere, it's fine. Like you can delete it, you can mess with it, you can run it through a script, and no matter what happens, like you're still going to be fine. You're not going to break your computer with an Excel formula. You're not going to completely overwrite your operating system if you write a Python script and it goes wrong. I think getting over that hurdle of like, oh, I don't want to break stuff, like break it. Like be confident, say like, I'm not going to destroy my computer, but I am going to break this Excel file. And once you get over that and have more fun, like playing around with what can I do here? Can I use this formula like this? It's really like getting a big thing of Play-Doh and just kind of messing with it until you find out what you can use. And that's kind of what I did when I went in with Python. When I started at SEGA, I actually started as a translator. I had no knowledge of Python at all. I had some computer science experience back in like high school when I was doing like basic, or like I think we did JavaScript, which was like the worst. But I hadn't coded at all since then. And then we ran into an issue where, excuse me, I'm like, we got some new files from the devs, and our approach to it was like, well, we'll just assign a translator to copy paste everything in. And I said something like, well, surely there's a better way. Like we could use a formula. Like we can't, like this person could be spending 8 hours translating and making progress on the project instead of doing something a machine could do. So that's when I looked into Python. Another translator who was there had been doing some Python work as well. And it seems like I said, like when you look at it, you're like, oh my god, that looks so complex. I don't know how I can learn this. But it's kind of like it's a language, a programming language, and we're all linguists. We've learned the rules of different languages, like where you can use this, where you can use that. It's very much kind of the same concept, except instead of communicating meaning, you're communicating instructions to, okay, take this line of Excel. In this line, find the cell that has this. If the cell has this, then do this. Very, very simple. So yeah, no, I really enjoyed it. Was very much like I said, learning a new language, kind of solving different puzzles here and there. And yeah, no, and then the satisfaction you feel when you realize you've saved 8 hours in the 30 minutes you spent writing the script. And now that you have the script too, you can just go in and be like, oh, I need to do it on another file, change the file name in the script, run it again. Boom, that's another 8 hours you've saved. It's very satisfying in a way.
Yeah, that's great. I've seen a question. How do you decide when there's a problem that investing time to find the solution is worth it? And she insists on worse.
Oh my god, that is such a good question, because there's definitely been a couple times where like as I'm engineering a solution, I'm realizing like I could have probably just copy pasted and I would have been done with it. I think for me, it's really obviously like how quickly does this need to get done? Like if it's like I need a character count for this within the next hour, I'm probably not going to tool a custom solution for that. I'm just going to do it either with existing tools I have or the old-fashioned way, like copy paste it into Word, figure it out. If it's a task where I know I'm going to have to do this 500 times, or this is something that'll be helpful in the future, and I have the time to tool out a solution, absolutely I will. Because in the end, it's all about saving time overall. I think another thing that I think about when I'm tooling solutions is, okay, like how annoying will this be for a human to do? Like, or is this even feasible for a human to do? So things like tracking projects or tracking how character count is changing along the way. Those are a lot more complicated processes to tool because you need to make sure you're storing the data and you have statistical analysis and whatnot, which is all super fun in my point of view. But at the same time, you know, you definitely have to weigh those kind of pros and cons. It's the same way that you're weighing the pros and cons, like, can I take this project? Do I have enough time to translate it by the due date, et cetera, et cetera. So really, it's a lot of kind of weighing those things, but definitely the biggest thing for me is time, and is this going to be something I'll have to do again? If I'm never going to have to do this again, and it's very specific to this one project, and it's going to be more time to tool than it will be for me to just do it the old-fashioned way or really annoying way, then absolutely. I think the only other thing, there's like been a couple of times in game dev where I realized like doing a human check would have been better. So kind of two birds, one stone. So like for example, oh God, this is a bad example, but like if you want to do a profanity check, obviously I have tools that I wrote that can check like a list of 2,000 different profanity words in a localization to pull each string that has the profanity in it so we can set it off to the ESRB or something like that. But let's say you've got some time on your project and you're like, it'd be really nice if all of our translators could go and do a second pass over what the editors have localized to see if there's any changes or like need to do stuff. So you can do a twofold approach, being like, I would love to get a second quality check, but while you're doing the quality check, if you see profanity, write it down. So kind of the two birds, one stone approach. And then at the same time, you're getting the added value of having a human linguist look through everything and be able to flag any translations that may have been skewed by the editor, or maybe they were mistranslated and they go, oh, shoot, now this makes sense. I totally messed that up. And kind of combine those two processes. So that's another thing that I think about.
Okay. So yeah, it's like you do this at multiple steps because we talk about like preparing the file. You're talking about having a second pass at the end. So it's really a process that you do before and after, maybe in the middle. I don't know if you have some issues to tackle or something.
Yep. I mean, at any stage of the process where you have a task that's going to be either really tedious or take really long time for a human, or just something that where a machine would be better suited to do stuff like lots of statistics and whatnot, you can implement some form of engineering. Like, for example, the very beginning of a project, when you're getting approached by a client to say, hey, I have this game, here's like the alpha build, and here's all the text. Obviously, you want to go in and see if you can analyze how much text is there, how many characters is it, if you're doing it from an Asian language, how many words is it. You can do even more analysis if you want to get very fancy to see like how complicated is the language. You can do a term extraction for like European languages. Term extraction is a little wishy-washy on Japanese and some other like Chinese languages as well. But yeah, so you can do stuff at the very beginning, even before taking on a project, to give you a better sense of, okay, if we have this many characters and it's like at this difficulty level for reading, like how many hours are we going to need to put into it, the terminology, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really interesting. Instead of just having a couple human linguists go through and manually dig through all the files to see what's going on, get a ballpark view. Obviously, you'll still want human linguists to do that, but having the actual numbers to back it up is not only helpful for you, but it's probably also helpful when you go up to the higher ups and say, hey, we want to do this project. It's going to take this long, and here's the math that shows why I'm right. Because having that concrete evidence is always great. So, I mean, you can start very, very early with engineering in a project, and having an engineer on your team that you can go to and say, hey, we've got this new project. I don't know what file forms these are in, but I need you to tell me how many words are in this project and how many files, and I need you to do term extraction. And that's something an engineer could get to you within a few days, which is probably much faster than human linguists can tell you all those answers. So no, there's so many different parts of a project depending on your process workflows where engineering can help you out.
Okay, so yeah, and I can see the use, and yeah, probably like especially when you get the text from the devs and it's like a file format you cannot open like this, and just like, okay, and you ask them to how many words is there, and they just look at you like, okay, I don't know.
We don't
So
have
it's
time to
good.
tell you. Yeah.
Okay, I see another question. Can you explain a bit more about term extraction to figure out the complexity of a text? That's a good one. How do you rate the complexity of a
Rate
text?
the complexity of code. This is the great part about engineering, is that a lot of these tools that do this are already created, but in different contexts. So for example, like the tool that would rate the complexity of text, I know at least for going out of English, there's a lot of English tools, like sometimes they're even free, like websites or algorithms where you paste text in and it'll give you like, okay, because it has this many words of this difficulty, because it has this and this in it, this is the expected reading level. And of course, while these are obviously just approximations, we can use them to be like, oh, this is a children's game, but for some reason it's rating really high on like the college level. What is the terminology, or what kind of words in there are triggering it to be a lot more difficult than what we thought was coming in was maybe a rather easy project? So it's just like another metric you can use to kind of look at maybe the difficulty of a translation. Obviously, it's not always applicable, especially if you're working on like an RPG or something for adults. Like you should assume there's probably going to be some complicated terminology in there, or a higher reading level possibly. In terms of term extraction, I don't know too much about it. I know that like SDL Trados had it built in for a while, and I'm sure there are other programs that do it as well. It's built into a couple different cat tools. But basically what that does is they have their own built-in mechanisms or algorithms that will scan a text for words of certain length, of certain frequency. A lot of these systems will already have their own built-in, like these are technical words we look for. So they're very helpful for like technical texts or like works of fiction, but it's great in gaming because you can go in and run term extraction and a lot of things like item names or, certain capitalized words like in English that'll show up a lot often. It'll automatically extract those and put those into a term base. I know term management is something that's super, super important, and I could talk all about it. But when you're working on a project, especially if you're crunching to meet a localization deadline, it can be really hard to remember, like, oh, I need to add this term. Now I need to add this, and this. Make sure everybody on my team knows, hey, I just added this term. If you run into it, you need to go back and find it. So the term extraction at the very beginning of the project can be really helpful. Like I said, though, it's better suited for certain language pairs than other language pairs because it was basically built for like the European language market. So I don't think I found any really good Japanese term extraction yet. And that's a lot because like Japanese terms can just be 2 characters or even 1. And what in a 2-character term may show up in another phrase and not be a term. So it's a little bit more difficult when it comes to that. But yeah, no, there's some really interesting linguistic tools that have been built for like not even just translation, but for like linguistic research or like the building out of corpora that we can kind of steal parts of that code or be like, you know what, I'm going to send this text in. Obviously, like make sure it's secure. If it's protected by NDA, you can't just go straight willy-nilly to a third party and run stuff through their service. But there are definitely services that you can either purchase or that are built into your cat tools that you can use.
Okay. Yeah. Julia asked you if one day you find such a tool for term extraction for Japanese, she wants one. I think it's the term extraction.
Oh my god.
But the complexity one is interesting as well. I do have one in my spell checking tool called Antidote that works for French and also English. It triggers the difficulty level if the words are, for example, too long, like a certain number of letters of syllable. If there are adverbs, I think the scores goes up as well. And I don't remember. I don't really often use it, but sometimes when I have time on a text, I just click on it to see what's the issue. So I don't know how it works. I think I have the metrics for English as well in there, but don't know if it works for French. But yeah, it's interesting sometimes I didn't even think to use it that way, like to estimate the complexity of a text.
Yeah, and I don't think it's super applicable to all of our game projects, but I can see cases in which like it could be a tool that helps us determine like how many linguists do we need, or it may be a worst case scenario, you've assigned only maybe 2 linguists to a project, and now all of a sudden you're seeing more text come in, and that text is rating very high on like a complicated issue. You may want to go to your linguist and say, hey, can you look at the new text that came in? Let me know if we need to get more linguists on this.
Yeah.
So Yeah.
I think I saw another question. I don't know if you, because you mentioned
Yes, I see the
Shadows,
chat. Yes.
but I don't know if you use MemoQ or if
I do.
you
I love
use.
MemoQ. I am
Perfect.
Trados is okay.
Yeah,
I'm a
I
MemoQ
yeah,
person.
I haven't used Stratos for years because I was a bit fighting with it to add Excel files in there, like multi columns and multi tabs in Stratos.
Oh,
So
oh, yeah. No, I mean Excel, trying to get Excel files imported into a cat tool at any time, especially stuff coming out of game studios where they may give you one that's like, okay, here's like 500 files and 100 of them are formatted one way and like
mm,
200 of them are formatted another way. Trying to do that through MemoQ can be really annoying because you have to set up separate filters for each type of Excel file that's
yeah,
coming in because it extracts via, it can't really determine for itself where the source and target are coming from, which is where engineering comes in. Um, excuse me. So we use MemoQ at SEGA. I think I still do. And one of the things that I did a lot as an engineer there is take file types that MemoQ would chug on, for example, like really big like Excel files or complicated like different XML formats and
mm,
whatnot, that setting up those filters in MemoQ would take a really long time. And then of course, excuse me, if the dev decided to change that structure at all during the course of the project, which of course, happens sometimes, we would have to go through and redo all of our filters.
mm,
So one thing that I did very often was create a script that would convert basically any file type in the project, especially in projects that have multiple file types. Remember, that also happens.
mm,
That'll determine the file type. You can write code that will look at the Excel things, be like, okay, I know that they always label the source column with, like, in Japanese, they might put like Nihongo at the top. So if you're reading the first row and Nihongo is in like row or in cell C1, then column C is going to have your source text. Um, and maybe they have that, maybe it's column D in certain files, maybe it's column A in certain files because of the way that different devs are working on the project.
mm.
But because we've already had that little bit of code that says determine what column it is, that kind of skips that step in having to make all those filters.
Okay.
And then from there, obviously, you do the first part of the code will be, where is the text we want, for source, for target? Is there any comments that we can bring in from the dev? Some developers will put really helpful information like the speaker is plural, the speaker is singular, the gender of the speaker, which
Mm,
is really, really helpful to have going into European languages. So you can put all that information like in a comment or whatnot. And then I typically convert into XLIF, which is a file format that plays really, really well with cat tools. It was designed for cat tools. And it's a very simple XML format. It's just source, target, comment. And then the comment, you can just put all the information you extract and then send it out into an XLIF. So when you do that, MemoQ, I would say we had one project at Sega that would take almost 8 hours to import via MemoQ. When we switched over to XLIF, it took maybe 5 minutes
okay.
because it's just that much faster because the XML format plays so much better with MemoQ.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, so that's one form of engineering, especially when going into game dev, I would say like saves so much time.
Mm,
Obviously, if you can talk to the dev and work out like, hey, you guys have your own tools for writing dialogue or for doing all the game text, like, or you're working in Unity or whatnot. Like, do you guys have an engineer on your side that could code something to spit out XLIF files for us or spit out an XML file that is like normalized, standardized throughout the entire project?
mm,
Obviously, going to the source is always easier, but we don't always have the privilege of working directly with a dev as translators or localization teams. So
yeah.
yeah, it's really interesting. Oh, the question was if I could add one thing to MemoQ,
Yeah. For example.
what would I do? I love MemoQ. I think, oh my God, there's so many things that I would fix with MemoQ. One module, I mean, though I would love for MemoQ to be more stable. The GUI crashes every now and then. That's always
Yeah.
really annoying. There are two bugs in MemoQ that I flagged years ago that MemoQ said they didn't have the resources to fix. So I will mention them now. The one bug I really want fixed is there is settings for using a translation memory on a project where when files are pre-translated, it will automatically adjust the tags.
Okay.
So a tag is like when you set up a MemoQ filter or like an SDL Trados filter, it'll automatically take things like the font or the bold setting, the line breaks, obviously. You can even set up custom ones. So like if it has like open bracket item number, blah, 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 you can have that turned into a tag so your translator can't edit it, but they can move it around in the text as need be. And of course, that reduces the risk of introducing new bugs for the whole team to figure out. But the issue with this bug is, let's say you're translating some Japanese text and it has 3 line breaks in it, but your translation that you've already translated has 2 line breaks in it because you didn't need to have that much space or whatever. Even if you turn off that setting in the translation memory, the bug will still readjust the line breaks and add an additional line break into the text, even when you're pre-translating it with an existing translation. I know it's a really esoteric bug, but it absolutely ruined my day on a lot of projects, because when you're re-importing like 6,000 files or something on some of these huge JRPGs or some of these really big like AAA projects, you don't have time to go in and double check that everything made it in okay, especially if it's been, it's being cross-translated in because it's already been done for 6 months. So MemoQ introducing bugs into the project, absolutely not okay. And they still have not fixed that bug. It makes me really upset. So that is what I would fix in MemoQ. But I would also really love Japanese term extraction would be great. I know that requires a lot more work. And I think better handling for Asian languages overall. MemoQ is developed like in Europe and primarily serves a lot of European languages. And I think better support for Asian languages, and I would also probably add in like Southeastern Asian, like Arabic, Middle Eastern languages as well probably have the same issue. Non-Roman text sets don't make a lot of cat tools happy. So we need more cat tools developed in those areas if we're going to see really good.
That would be great. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they're quite slow, but they do add stuff, interesting stuff. Like my spell checker Antidote is an independent software, and there was a plugin available for Trados like for years, and it's been just a few years it's been added to MemoQ. Before we used to export the file, correct everything into Word or Excel, whatever, and then re-import. Or you should open the stuff on the side and manually change things into MemoQ, so you just have to be careful to not change in your file and not in MemoQ. It was a nightmare. But at least...
Also, Julia, that 100% activates me that it's an O into an A. Yeah. I hate it. I hate it so much.
Yeah. There are so many things you can do. And could we count the regular expressions as engineering as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was something I had to learn a lot of when I was engineering at SEGA. And I think the hardest thing with regex is it is an absolute nightmare, especially when you're getting really complicated. Like you want to catch as much as possible with just one string of regex. I think my biggest suggestion I could give to people with regex, especially if you're using like in code or like trying to create your own tool, is like don't be afraid to create spaghetti. And spaghetti is like a coding term of like you write really unelegant code. You put like 20 lines in where it could be 1. Obviously, you could write a regex expression that's like super duper long that catches everything. But if you're not confident in that, or you want to be able to look at it and know what it does, it is 100% okay to split it up into 5. No one's going to see the back end except for you and maybe your supervisor, who might be like, what is this doing here? Like, make this better. Excuse me. But there's no reason. It's always okay to write bad code if it works. If it doesn't crash things, if it doesn't bloat your project, it's always okay to write bad code. Don't let my husband hear that because he's a coder. I'm sure he would come in and agree, though.
Okay, I see someone has suffered from the regular expression.
It is suffering. I think the good thing, though, is there's so many resources now for regex online. Like I use regexer a lot, wherein I'll like type in some sample text that is like kind of similar to what I want in the game. Again, I don't want any code or text going out into a third-party tool, to break NDA or whatnot. You never know where this stuff is going. But it's great to be able to test my stuff. They have little cheat sheets on the side. And then, of course, I know it works before I plug it into my tool and test it. So I don't have to be constantly running, like, I may be putting this regex into a whole program where it's like converting and finding text and then moving that text to a different doc. Like, instead of having to run like my 5-minute code, I can just test the regex there. So yeah, it's very helpful, though, and it's 100% engineering. And if you do a lot of regex while you're working with localization, you are 100% engineer. Like, just put it on your profile. There you go.
Awesome. I was going to ask, like, how can you become a localization engineer? Because you learned a lot of stuff because you needed to, and you picked what you needed. But is there a way to, maybe a more direct way or efficient way to gain the basic knowledge and get started on the right track, I might say?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the path going from the localization expert or like translator linguist to localization engineer pathway is much better in terms of your proficiency as an
Mm,
engineer, or loc engineer specifically, than going from software engineer to localization engineer. Because as we all know, localization is so very specialized. There's so
mm,
many things we have to take into account, especially depending on the language pair. Um, like for example, an engineer coming in may not realize, oh, linguists really need this gender information, or they really
yes.
need to know this other plurality information. Like they look at this information that's offered and may not know what's important and
Mm,
what's not. And when they bring that to a linguist, the linguist may not be able to read it and say, hey, I don't know what you're showing me. Like maybe we need this, maybe we need this. So coming in with that linguistic knowledge, which is already highly specialized and not a lot of people have it, then learning a bit of code to help you with that, I think is probably the better route. So if you're here, you're probably a linguist. So, there you go.
you know
But
what
yeah,
you
I
have
think
to do.
it's still, yeah, it's still a very, I want to say it's a niche within the localization niche.
Mm,
And you'd be surprised how many companies out there, especially like Japanese to English, that don't have localization engineers that are still working out of Excel
mm,
for these huge games. Like I'm not going to name names because obviously I can't. But there are a lot of big players in the localization industry that just say, well, whatever, we'll just do it through Excel, or
mm,
we'll just use like a Google Doc for all of our terminology management. Because adapting a cat tool and creating engineering is, of course, it costs labor, it costs money, and
yeah.
capitalism, all that shit. But no, so it's because it's so niche though. Like if you can pick up a little bit of skill, like with coding, there's a ton of boot camps out there if you really want to dive into stuff like C# to create your own applications. Really though, it's so accessible now to learn computer science that if you're interested in adding this as part of your job, you could absolutely do that in your free time as a freelancer, and then just go ahead and slap that on your resume. Say like, hey, I have engineering, I can do Python, I can do C#, I can work with JavaScript, I've worked with the MemoQ API.
Mm,
So there's a lot of really cool things you can do. And the best part about computer engineering is if you don't know something, 99% chance someone else has done it. I'm gonna call it. I don't know their name. I wish I could have just had this like when I came in. But when I was working with the MemoQ API at SEGA, I was having a really big issue trying to read translation memories in from the database on the MemoQ server. But then I found online that another localization engineer had coded an entire system to do that exact thing and put it online for everybody to use. So of course, after testing it to make sure it's not going to like steal all
mm,
the game information and send it off, I was able to implement it, and I sent him a really nice thank you. And I was just like, yo, like this saved me like 3 weeks of trying to figure out how this stupid API works and X, Y, and Z. And he was like, yeah, no, I spent that 3 weeks for you already. Like, please take my code and do it. So I think that's
mm.
the best part about engineering, is those resources are out there, and you can just take them again, make sure they're safe, don't leak any information you can't leak,
Yeah.
and then use it to help your own project. So yeah, versus when you're translating, like you can still use all of your resources, but you may need to reach out to a person or a native speaker and be like, okay, I can't figure this out. Someone may have it figured out exactly what you want to do in engineering side.
Mm. Okay, well, it's okay, Julia. You can still. It's not too late to learn anything. Like you said, Python was kind of on the easy side for to start with. So
Yeah, I mean, Python I think is accessible because it's very straightforward. It's a scripting language versus like an object-oriented language.
mm,
And a scripted language, I feel like made more sense to me to start with because it's very simple. You are giving the computer instructions to do something. So when you type like move this file here, it will do that. It will move the file there, and then it'll
mm,
be done. It's very simple. It's very powerful though. So like if you type like delete my whole system folder, it will do it.
okay.
So obviously don't, as long as you don't type instructions that are going to break your computer, and again, it's very rare that you will, you'll be fine. And there's a lot of great websites to do it. I think my favorite one is called Automating the Simple. I think it's Automating the Simple. Let me look it up real quick. I'm at my computer. It's called Automating the Boring Stuff with Python. It's by Al Zweigert.
Oh, that sounds
And it
nice.
is a full kind of like basic programming course. It's all free online to follow, but it's based around like you want to do stuff in Python. It's not going to teach you the basics of here's a variable, here's how the code works, let's write a code that does math. It'll say, hey, here's an Excel sheet with email addresses. You want to see which ones are duplicates or whatnot, which could be helpful to us. And it will give you those practical solutions and take you step by step, teach you how it works. For me, that was really helpful because I don't need to learn how to do all the math or learn how to do all the sorting and all that stuff you might see in a more practical like computer programming class. I just need to be able to open a huge Excel spreadsheet and do a word count or, look for this terminology that we need to fix. And yeah, so I really, I'll type it in. I don't think I can type it in the chat because I don't have a YouTube channel, but I will share it with you. Automating the boring stuff with Python.
Awesome. And I will add it to the YouTube description as well, so you can find it, guys, there. It will be easier. I think we will just all jump on the links and bookmark everything.
Absolutely. No, I kept a bookmark for a while too, because there's certain times where I was like, oh, I don't remember how I did this. You can go straight back. I have a paperback version as well that I just bought. So, speaking of books I just bought, I've just picked up this one here, Excel VBA.
Oh.
Which I hate. I hate Excel VBA so much. But I need to learn it. For those who aren't familiar with Excel VBA, so in Excel you can write macros that'll do stuff within Excel. And it can be very helpful for when you don't want to write something outside of Excel. Like you want to be able to share a document and be like, press a button and it'll give you the word count in Excel. The problem with VBA is it's a very different and a very old programming language. It does what it's supposed to do. I hate it. I hate it a lot. I can't talk much more about it because most of the time when I'm coding in VBA, I'm going online and stealing bits and pieces here and testing it until it works. Remember, you can always keep running your code until it works, even if it doesn't work the first time. But oh my god, I hate VBA so much. So I bought this book, so I'm gonna put it in like the bathroom and I'm gonna force myself to read it.
Yeah, well, you can do amazing stuff with Excel anyway, so it's kind of nice. But yeah, I've seen a long question, and while I read it, I will just, like Julia said, I should mention my use of the gaming mouse to work, because I have the Logitech mouse, and there is like tons of buttons there. And since I'm a lazy person, I'm always working like this, holding my head, and I have Control V, Control C, Control A, everything on the buttons.
Me too. I have my blur on, so I have my my Shift and Control key on the side of my mouse.
Okay. So I'm not
I had a wrist injury, so it's hard for me to turn my wrist to hit the Control and the Shift sometimes.
Okay.
So I'll just use it on here.
Okay, so I'm not the only one. I was considering investing into a Stream Deck for like the French accented letters and everything. I have to press like Alt 0160.
I hate that.
It's taking so much
time. It's much easier on a Mac somehow.
Probably, yeah. Or I think it's even easier for me to write French characters on a QWERTY keyboard instead of ALSATI keyboard, which I have right now. Because we don't have the same keyboard. So Jonathan asked 2 questions in one. So he was gonna ask about to find lock engineers. And okay, you answered the question a bit, like if you do want someone with more linguistic background or a background with code. So you said that it might be easier, better for the job if you have a linguistic background, like you said, you understand the languages. Like if you work with teams, like Russians have many plurals. You said about the need of a gender. Sometimes for some languages, you need to know the age of the person as well. So
I think in terms of deciding who to hire, it's important to understand always like what your needs are for the project. In a lot of cases, the engineering need you might have is, I just need to convert some files back and forth, or, I need someone to write a script who can find all the words in this, that, and the other thing. And if that kind of time isn't that big of an issue, Like you're not super crunching. You don't need anything very, very fancy, like full programs written out or full interfacing with the MemoQ API. Absolutely, I would suggest getting a linguist with some coding experience,
Mm.
who can learn on the job, like with the coding, but won't have to constantly be talking to your translation team or understanding what localization needs there might be, because they already know what the localization team will need. I mean, what the dev team may need to do to get them the information the loc team needs. Because in the end, the localization engineer is there to assist the loc team.
Mm.
Obviously, they also assist the devs when we're taking text and putting them back into the dev stuff. But primarily, they're there to make sure the loc team works like more efficiently, faster, and then of course for the company, more bang for their buck.
Yeah.
If you're looking, like if you're a bigger corporation, like if you're Blizzard or something and you're looking to hire a localization engineer, you're likely going to be looking for someone with more engineering background than linguistic background, because you're expecting them to interface with maybe some proprietary tools, to know multiple languages, to handle all of the different dev environments they're working in. So in those cases, absolutely you want somebody with that, maybe even game coding experience, so they know how to work with Unity, or with other game environments. But yeah, I would say for most of the people that I work with in game localization are either working, with a language services company, or a very small company as like an English or like a US or a European counterpart for like a development company somewhere else. Yeah, you can probably just go with a linguist who knows how to code.
Okay. I think sometimes linguists will find it frustrating because they would not work like translation per se, but just like coding. So they need to love to code as well. But I think a good stuff you can do to try like to break projects is like to find developers that are willing to give you a build of a game they made that you can break and you can try to extract stuff, put back stuff in, like, yep, doing your this service. I think it's kind of fun. I would have need Python very bad last year when I tried to organize a logjam run created with RenPy, and it doesn't extract the text for cat tools. It doesn't have any compatible file format except the editor. And I think if I knew Python, I would have solved my problem in like a few days at least, instead of struggling for weeks.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that I've done as well as a loc engineer, is that string extraction. Because sometimes you're not given a nice XML or an Excel sheet that has the strings. You are given the raw file that's like, yeah, here's the raw like Python or XML or C# code that's going to go into the game. Extract the strings we need there. And depending on the file format, it's easier or harder. But luckily, in the case of the games that I was working on, they had most of the strings were surrounded by quotation marks. They had character breaks, so that obviously if a character is using quotes within the quotes, excuse me, wouldn't break it. So we could and did make our own string extraction code to be able to pull stuff out. Now, obviously, when you pull stuff out, you have to be able to put it back in, which is an entirely different problem altogether, but definitely something you have to think about. And another thing to flag is, sorry, I'm just like full of burps this morning. It's the soda, I swear. One of the other things you have to think about too is a lot of devs, if they're not extracting their own strings, or they're not really managing their strings with other different software, they're just kind of like hard coding stuff in, they don't assign unique IDs to their strings. I think developers have gotten much better about this over the years, especially as they're realizing like, oh, localization makes us more money. Maybe we should make loc faster, instead of horrible for everybody involved. But there are still, I would say probably more with indie devs or smaller developers, or developers that haven't worked with localization teams very closely before, may not realize that, hey, having a unique ID for all of your strings is going to make things much easier when we're swapping things in and out.
Yeah.
So then you'll have to code your own, like, how are we assigning unique IDs to strings? And then of course that becomes its whole nightmare on its own. But yeah, no, I don't know what we were talking about. I just went off about strings.
But just that makes me think that I'm working on a project at the university. I have a partnership with my university and a developer school. And I'm just thinking with a bit of horror right now that I hope they thought about unique IDs because I don't know what's going to happen with my students if it's not the case. Because I would not really be able to help them because I can learn fast, but I don't think I will be that fast to learn anything like Python or to solve the problem. So that's a good one. And I was going back to a question from Jonathan. It was the last little bit. Where he said, I found folks with the title localization engineer quite hard to find, and I wanted to tie this with: is there a lot of job offers for localization engineer, or is it more like not that visible? It's more like inside, and the company just ask around and promote someone.
I think, yeah, I think, and I can't speak for the industry kind of as a whole. I can just speak for like my language pair, for
Mm,
Japanese to English. I would say, yeah, it's not a very big thing. Like a lot of these companies, like I have no idea what goes on at Square Enix, but I would imagine that they have an engineer who may not be called a localization engineer, but they have someone in their engineering team who is specifically assigned to doing file stuff. Like I said,
mm,
I don't exactly know what goes on over there, but I'm assuming because of the scale of the projects they work on, like it would be crazy if they're all working out of Excel, like and not using CAT tools.
yeah.
Absolutely bonkers. So I think, but I think as we see more companies starting to implement, saying like, hey, why are we working out of Excel? We can go faster. We can have more visibility on the process, and track the project better by using some of these CAT tools. We may see people starting to hire on localization engineers.
Mm,
Unfortunately, as I'm sure is happening in a lot of different companies, they may not even consider hiring a new person. They may just go to their, like I said, their engineering team and be like,
mm.
hey, do you have a coder that's not busy? We need some help converting these files. And that person may transition into a localization engineer role without even realizing that that's what they're doing.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well, and yeah, it's really interesting because I have the alert on LinkedIn about localization engineering. I was curious about this, so yeah, this and localization specialist, and I was just like, okay, there is not that much. Maybe people don't know, and you're talking about like devs should try to look into CAD tools, and I see this coming back very often. Sometimes with devs that do not have that much experience with localization, and sometimes when I talk to them, they're just like, "Oh, but we created this awesome tool to localize our game." And I'm just like, "Okay." And I
Yeah.
see
Did
this
you talk
often.
to linguists when you made the tool,
Mm.
sweetie?
It's a bit like this, yeah, because I at least they got something very cool, but yeah, they're lacking like the most useful feature, actually useful for games. I don't know for other fields, but I think in gaming you cannot have any translation work done without a term base and a translation memory. I think it's
Hmm.
the basic. You cannot work with like going back 3 lines above to find how did you translate that specific term that happened,
Hmm.
like that appeared like once or twice in the game. So
No, absolutely. I mean, it's great when developers do take steps to try and help localization on their own. That just shows that they are thinking about localization.
mm,
A lot of devs don't think about localization until they're like going gold and they're like, oh, we need to get Loki on this. We'll just find some LSP and run everything through them and then get it back in and we'll figure it out. When you start early in the process, you can obviously, put those tools in together, be
mm,
like, hey, I built a Unity add-on that will extract the strings and put it into this format. But just in the same way, like you wouldn't write a cookbook without talking to a chef,
mm,
like you shouldn't make your localization tools without talking to at least a localization specialist. Let alone localization specialists in all of the languages you want to go into, because every language, even languages that people might think are similar, like even within like Brazilian Portuguese versus like European Portuguese,
mm,
there's going to be differences in their needs that one may not know about the other. So
yeah.
I think, if you're going to put together a tool as a dev to help your localization team, you should talk with your localization team and be like, hey, great to have you on. We have a tool, but we need to know what you need. Like, here's the tool, here's some sample files, play around with it, and let us know what's going on.
Mm,
And then not only just create it, but constantly improve upon it as you're going through the game cycle. Like, if, like, there's nothing. There's nothing good about saying, well, this is the first version, we're not going to do any touch ups, because excuse me, there's always going to be bugs. There's always going to be something that can be done better. There's always going to be something like maybe you got instructions for how to handle plurals, and you implemented it the way you thought it should be done, but then the linguists start using it and they go like, oh no 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 no, make it like a drop down instead of a this, that, and the other thing. So there's always something to be improved upon. I mean, this goes for anything in life. Like everything can always be better.
yeah.
Work with the people who know what would make it better, and then if you know how to do that, then collaborate. But it's not always easy with localization, especially if you've got an LSP in the middle of it. So,
Mm, yeah. At the moment, I've seen more devs telling me that they will ask the publisher to take care of this, and then the publisher will push it to the LSP for this problem. And yeah, if you don't think about localization first, you find issues like the project I cannot name that I'm working on is exactly the same. It started with English, and they localized first with German, then Spanish and Portuguese, I think Brazilian Portuguese, and no French. And basically, they had to rework the code to add new bits of code that will take gender and plural into account and everything. So they had to create specific bits of codes with specific formats for us to just add specific stuff and everything, and so that it kind of work all the time. Because sometimes you need a gender when there is none in English, or sometimes in French, when we talk about owning an object, the gender applies to the object and not to the person. So we can cheat a bit this way. So sometimes we need to get rid of some code, and sometimes we need to add some. So, and it's always a bit tricky because when you're developing the game, it's usually when you're going gold, like you said, you still have some bugs to to tackle. It's like the house is on fire, and localizers come back and just like, we need some stuff to to be changed there. Can you help?
That's why it's always good to start early with localization. No matter what creative process you're doing for making a movie, TV show, game, like anything that's going to need to be localized, marketing campaigns especially. We start early and be like, this is what we need to do. Let's figure it out. But yeah, I think one great thing that we could do, and hopefully this is something like the IGDA can do, is getting game developers and localizers from all different parts of the world, with all different kinds of language requisites. And I mean, even do maybe a loc jam or a game jam, something like, hey, we want to make a game that you can pick the gender of your character, and maybe their pronouns as well. How do you handle that when you're writing text for a scene between that character, like the main character, and other people who are talking about stuff they own, or maybe where they live, or, oh, you have 3 cats. Well, that's gonna completely change depending on the gender of the character that they've chosen. And then maybe after doing those kind of exercises, coming together and be like, cool, we all need to translate this, like, something developed in an Arabic language or an Arabic script language would have to be translated into like a German. Like, how do you go back and forth between those without introducing like tons of spaghetti code, basically? So I think there's a lot we can learn from one another, especially around the world, because like I'm still learning, even now that I'm working in 30-40 languages, like as a project manager, there's still stuff I'm learning about other languages in the world, like even languages I've never heard of. I'm like, what? Like how did I not know like 30 million people spoke this language? Like I've never heard of it, and it has all these really cool linguistic quirks about it. And then of course, the more we learn, the more we interact with one another, the better we can, create solutions that not only work for us but are versatile enough that when we bring other languages on board, or when language inevitably changes, we have the tools to be able to maneuver around it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, coding should also be in the best practice guide. Yep, we need to rework this because it's like 10 years old and a lot happened, and we see more languages like Arabic and Turkish that are gaining visibility. It's slower for Arabic, but it's still there. It's gaining visibility, and I see more games looking to localize into this. So that's great. And yeah, it's another challenge. We made another a few months ago about this. So
I will have to check that out. I know Arabic is like Arabic and Arabic scripts, languages that will use the same script. It's spoken by such a huge portion of the world. And when you're looking at that from like a game dev or like even a marketing like corporation perspective, like that's a whole chunk of the Earth's population who could play your game, who could give you money. Localization is a profit enabler. Like obviously it costs money to make, but more than anything in your game, more than your graphics, more than your gameplay itself, like the localization itself is going to return the revenue much more than any of that. But then of course we see there's been so many different talks about this at like ATA and whatnot, that like even in Hollywood, they like the biggest grossing Hollywood films will spend less than 1% of their budget on international marketing and localization, when their film will gross more than 50% of the total film gross is made outside the original area.
Yeah,
which is a huge return on investment, if we're
exactly.
looking at this in like capitalistic senses.
Mm,
So it makes absolute sense for us to start looking and be like, hey, that's a huge market we want to capture. And obviously we want people in Arabic speaking countries to be able to play our games, to enjoy them
mm,
in the exact same way that somebody in the US or in Germany or Japan would be able to enjoy it. But of course, I mean, there's a whole slew of cultural and historical reasons why we may like some devs may balk at like, oh, I like Arabic. It's like, do we really want to market over there? There's a cultural concerns and whatnot. But then of course, when you look at it at the code level, when you're looking at
mm,
right to left languages instead of left to right languages, that creates a whole new different way to approach it. But you
yeah.
have to do it. And lots of companies have, I mean, McDonald's, like large corporations, they all have websites that are catering to these right to left languages. So we, as developers, as we move into like wanting to expand into these territories, we need to talk with developers from those territories, like get
Mm,
good information on like how are you developing games over there? How are you localizing stuff over there? Like what can we do, not just as localizers, but like on the project management side, on the dev side,
yeah.
to make it like internationalize our games so it's easier, I should say, to
Mm,
localize that into a right to left language or into Arabic. So anyways, I mean the more people who can play games, like the better the world is in my opinion. So
exactly. And
we just
like I
have to
said,
get
like
through the challenge.
it gets easier if you start early. Like even if you don't plan to localize your game yet or at all, it's always better to start to learn how to handle things, how to be ready to code. Because yeah, when you start to grow and you want to reach other regions, then you still have the issue like you have to rework the code, you have to take into consideration the cultural aspect as well. So it means that you will change your game later. But if you have done this before, you're ready for it. You already
Hmm.
tuned stuff, you're already prepared for everything. So in the end, the process is very easy. Instead, if you do it
Right.
at the last minute, yeah, you will find a lot of issues.
Right. And I think it can also help developers too to adopt these really good localization practices because in the end, these are practices that are going to make it easier to interact with text with games.
Mm,
And we've seen so many games coming out over the last 10 years that are focusing more on that narrative or on really interesting creative writing styles. And being able to adapt to that um, I'm sorry, being able to adapt that for localization will also bring more tools maybe to our side. For
mm,
example, like being able to code genders in for language, they may be able to play with that on a really creative end in a sci-fi game. Be like, well, let's make a whole race of aliens that has like 5 genders, and now we can have the different nouns in English. Like you could play around with language in
mm,
a really interesting way as a writer with some of these tools that are created for localization. So
yeah.
I think um, and also like on top of that, like the tools that we create to help like export files for translation can make it easier for maybe writers to work with things. Maybe the writers have always wanted a different interface to work with the writing tool that they have, or maybe they're looking for a better way to export certain things or toy around with the code on their own.
Mm,
So yeah, I think there's a lot of good things that could be happening, or I'm trying to, what's the word I'm looking for? Benefits. Benefits. There are a lot of benefits to the game dev side, and really any creator side that will help them just by implementing stuff for localization.
mm, exactly. Yep. Just looking, I saw the chat. Julia is on fire. It's awesome.
Good.
Yeah. But yeah, there is so much to do, and it cannot happen if we don't communicate, if we don't share, because yeah, other people in the world have the knowledge we lack. So all we need is to
We just have
reach
to
out
ask.
and yeah, share experience, share the knowledge.
Hmm.
The Arrival. I don't know the title of this movie.
Oh, the movie Arrival. It's the one with like the big alien ship comes down and they hire the linguist to like try and understand the try to like
Mm,
communicate with the aliens. Really,
okay,
really interesting movie.
I think the French is like first contact or something. I don't.
Oh yeah.
Do they translated the title? I don't know. But yeah, those are
Yeah,
kind
I
of
can't
nice.
relate
Yeah, to try to see how they make it. I like games with different languages, but sometimes it's a challenge.
Yeah.
um,
Have you played? Oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of the game, but there's a whole game about investigating an ancient alien civilization and learning how their language works.
Alien or
Maybe
Ancient?
someone,
It's Evans Vault, for example.
yeah,
Maybe.
I forget. I forget the name of it. I bought it and I never finished it. I felt terrible. I think somebody, Heaven's Vault, that's the one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Somebody posted it. Yes, Heaven's Vault.
Yeah.
Really, really interesting. I would love to see how that game was localized, honestly. Like,
I don't think it is because if I remember, I don't know if I reached out to them or if I saw it written somewhere, but because the language is based on English, I think they said that it would have been too tricky to localize. I'm not really sure. Maybe I'm saying
cowards!
something
Cowards!
because it's made with ink. I think I don't know how Inkle. I don't know how this tool work. I know it's used for narrative games, but I think it's very tricky and it's procedural text as well. So
Cowards.
yep.
We can localize it. Give us
Yeah.
time. We'll figure it out. If we need to
For sure.
create tools to do it, we will.
Mm.
Like, I think that's one of the things that like really kills me. I've seen a couple people comment on certain things like, "Oh, why don't we localize this? Why don't we do that?" I'm just like, "Oh, because it'll be too difficult or too complicated." I'm like, "Well, why is it too complicated?" Like, "Oh, it's going to take us a month to code that? Cool, we can take the month." "Oh, you don't want to pay us for the month it's going to take to code that?" Okay, I see how it is. So, you know, I think everything and anything is localizable. Obviously, the localization approach is going to need to change based on your audience and how quickly you need to get it out. But I absolutely hate the notion that like, oh, we can't localize this game because it's too tough. It's like, well, it's going to be a challenge, and you're probably going to need to talk to a lot of people and spend some money to make it really good. But if you have the money, let's go. Let's make something really cool. So
yeah. Sometimes the money is the issue, like when the games get too big, like millions words, and too technical. Sometimes, yeah, it's a bit scary to, and you need to train your linguists to learn how to use the tools or the bits of codes. Like my project, we had a 3 hours workshop to understand all the different bits of codes that were in the game, the one we shouldn't touch, the one we can use, and how we can use them because there are specific cases, always exceptions. So
yep.
it's a bit of a challenge.
And I mean, 3 hours to me sounds super short. Like that's all the training you guys had. Like, wow. Like especially on like some of these bigger games, like our games that I worked on at Sega. Like it was like a whole project long process of learning. Like, oh, we can adjust this here, we can adjust that there. And we didn't get like most of the time weren't able to talk directly to the devs and say, hey, give us a whole list of how everything works, because the devs are busy. They're busy working on the game. And they, a lot of the times when we're working with devs, that's what we run into is like, we don't have time to tell you how everything works, figure it out yourself. And I was like, well, okay, thanks. Cool. See you in QA.
No, we do have the team has contact and everything, so it's well managed. But it's still a challenge just for yourself as a translator. Like you think you understand, and then you work on it, and you're just like, okay, no, I don't get it. It's always like this. It's like going up and down. And it's like I understand, I don't understand, I understand, I don't anymore. But it's it's always nice to.
Yeah, no, it's always nice. Like, and whether you're working with a translation team that's in-house or you're working through an LSP, it's really critical, like at the very beginning stages of the project, to say like we need to have that, if not completely open line of communication, like a stratified way for us to be able to communicate with linguists. That isn't just like here's an Excel sheet of the 200 questions we have. Like, obviously that's one way to do it, and it's better than nothing. But being able to ask the devs questions and get answers back in a timely manner is great. Like in my perfect world, not like completely controlled by like LSP contracts or like money, I would love like boom, like here's a Slack channel where like the key developers of this, that, and the other thing are in, and then all the linguists have access to it as well. And the linguists can come in and be like, hey, I want to change this item code. Can I do that? And then I can have a developer come and answer them within like 5 minutes. And I mean, with all of us working from home for the last few years, like we've all learned how to communicate and work with like, okay, I'm gonna have to wait 10 minutes for this guy to get back from lunch, or like, I think we're better equipped to implement those kind of systems now than we were maybe 10 years ago, because we're all used to it now. Just get the localization team their own freaking Slack channel. Let's go.
Yeah, we don't see it very often. Yeah, sometimes it's lack of many things, organization, time, and will. Maybe.
I mean, even the thought that, hey, we should do this. Because localization, especially coming from like English speaking countries where we don't consume a lot of translated work, that's a whole other TED talk. That may not be the first thing they think of. It's like, oh, we need to get the localization team in here. Because again, if they're going gold, they're like, okay, cool, we gotta get this localized into 20 languages. Call the LSP, I don't care.
Okay, yeah. Sometimes
We
there's
got to get
this.
away from that thinking.
Yeah, because it's not just language. There is more to to localization than just language. You cannot do this. Um,
Ooh, that's a good question.
yeah, that's a good one. Finding solutions.
Oh. Oh, someone wants me to talk about machine translation.
Yeah.
It looks really, really bad when game studios resort to just machine translation. And the one thing I always bring up when I'm ranting and raving about like, AAA game studios not putting money into translation or localization is like what an insult that is to everyone you're trying to sell that game to in that language. Like how insulting is it to, be a native Spanish speaker, be a native Portuguese speaker, or a native Chinese speaker and be like, "Wow, like God of War Ragnarok is in my language. I can't wait to play it." And then all of a sudden it's just really, really bad writing. Like the translation is completely wrong. What an insult that must be that you've what looks forward to this game and they've spent all this money on the marketing campaign to get you to buy it, and when you go they didn't care enough about you, your language, your culture. This is your life. They didn't care enough about that to spend maybe the extra couple $1,000s to bring you a quality localization. Like how insulting is that, really? And it absolutely drives me up a wall. I could go on a whole freaking rant about it. But it's absolutely horrendous, and I think a lot of it comes from that very Anglo-centric point of thinking where it's like, oh well, it's not that important, like whatever, we need to get the localization out, it doesn't matter. And it really is about not caring about those players. If they cared more about, like, if we knew and understood how much of that, again, is a profit enabler. Like, to go back, like, I hate to keep going back to capitalism, but it's really the only thing that talks to these producers. Is like, if you want to make more money, if you want to create like a better image, if you want to bring more value to your company and your shareholders and stocks, like, you need to invest that little bit of extra time and money on localization, because really, compared to the amount they spend on graphics, on programming, on play testing alone, like, there's so much money that goes into these huge AAA projects. Like, to not allocate the appropriate budget to localization, and not just localization, but good localization, is embarrassing.
Yeah.
Especially when we are more interconnected than we were maybe 5 years ago before the pandemic. Like, we're interacting with people from all different parts of the country. Like, all of my friends that are my age or younger, like, everyone has friends in different countries who speak different languages. Like, if we live in America, we are the melting pot. Like, we don't have a official national language. So why would we insult our players who we want to buy the game and give us money for the stuff we made, and B, play the game we worked so hard on? Like, think of all of your writers who spent so much time crafting this amazing story and the characters. Like, think like, if you're a writer and you spent all this time, but like a good 60 to 80% of your audience is experiencing it through like 5 stages of Google Translate. Like, what an insult that is to you as a writer. Like, you spent so much time crafting this, but now the only people who are going to read it are people who are reading it in your target language or in your source language. Like, come on, guys. So I think it's just absolutely super embarrassing. It's super insulting. At the very least, use human linguists. Spend the extra money to do a double pass to make sure you catch translation errors. Because, like, even with all of my time in the business, and I'm sure a lot of other translators can absolutely speak up to this. Like, you can have so many years and so much experience, but you will still make mistakes. Even really, really stupid mistakes, or like mistakes that maybe anybody would have made. And having that second pass is so important. So, yeah, no, I like you can see, I get very, very activated about it. If you want to make money, like, spend the money right. Like, don't you wouldn't cheap out on graphics. You wouldn't cheap out on like getting a terrible air conditioning unit for your office. So don't cheap out on localization. Like, come on, guys.
Yeah. Or if you don't have the budget, maybe don't localize first. Maybe try to make a success first and then invest and do something good. And don't go like for all the languages in the world. Just be more strategic. Start to look where you have the more chance to be successful in another language and go from there, and then you build up. And I think it's the safest way, because if you go with too many languages, some will work and some won't work, and you will lose some money. So
right, I think that's absolutely a great point. And unfortunately, I think a lot of these companies, again, this is coming from a very Anglo-centric point of view. They don't think, they're like, oh, well, whatever, we'll just slap on the localization, we'll probably get a couple more sales. And yeah, sure, you can run it through machine translation, and yeah, you'll probably get another couple sales. But is that really what you want to be known for? I mean, we've already seen a lot of large-scale indie studios that have done this, or even worse, asked fans like on their Discord or their forums or whatnot to do the translations for them, which is a completely separate topic, which I will not go into. But if I think there is backlash, but there's not enough to make these companies understand like, oh, there's a different way. I think we really need to go like back to devs and say, hey, devs, like localization is a big deal. Like here's why you need to do it properly. Like turn it instead of like at the last minute, like, ah, shit, we got to do localization. Crap, we didn't plan for it. Whatever. Like, instead of turning it there, like, bring it into the beginning of the development process. Like, when you're planning out your gameplay, when you're planning out your target audience, when you're looking at, okay, like, what's the genre we're aiming for? What's our release date? Like, add that into the conversation. Be like, cool, let's talk about localization. What are the base languages we want to go for? If it's just English or whatever your source language is, that's fine. Like, if you're not planning for localization, you can deal with that later. But if like after you release or like want to do a DLC or an additional language pack, but if you're already planning like, well, we do eventually want to release in eFigs for Europe, or we want to handle like your stereotypical like Chinese, Korean, and Japanese, like cool. Talk about it when you're starting to plan the project, because if you plant that seed that like, hey, this is an important part of the dev process that will make us a ton of money, then we need to think about it right at the start.
And you can always do it later. There's like famous MMORPG, famous, at least for me, The Elder Scrolls Online. They started with English, probably French and German. Everything is voiced over, even the secondary quests and everything. And
wow.
I think last year they went with Spanish, only last year. And they have a huge community. So you can still work and just go, and that's all. They don't have any other language. It's like English, German, French, and now Spanish. So they're still successful. So it's a bit sad if you don't understand English, because it's a game based on story. So obviously you're missing a lot, but still it's like even them, they didn't went for all the languages on earth. So there is maybe a reason behind this. So you can do the same. You don't have to go for everything. Just pick what will work for you and go from there.
Right.
It's already great to work with one.
Yeah, no, and I will chime in though, on top of talking to your localization team, if you decide like early in the process, like, yes, we want to target Europe and do FIGS languages, you should also talk to your marketing team immediately then, because the needs for marketing in another country are going to be completely different. You can't just take your marketing campaign and translate it over. So again, like working with either a transcreation team or like a marketing team that you've hired separately of the LSP to help you market it in that language and that player base and culture, also super important. But a lot of companies don't think that. It's like, again, translation is the afterthought. So again,
that's always an issue, and that's why we don't really see many jobs for localization specialist or localization engineer, because it's like not something that is sold before. It's like an afterthought. So maybe many people don't see the reason for those jobs. I think they're still very important. Like we said, you deal with the files before and after. You have to make sure that you can get everything, but also it's a funny part, I think, that you can push back everything and it doesn't break the game. So it's I think that's the reason why sometimes we don't see those jobs, and it's not advertised, and it's very hard to learn how to get this job and how to do the job. And that's why maybe you just kind of get promoted because you unfortunately were not busy at that time. Okay, just looking at my little questions, I think we are a bit over time.
Are we good on time, by the way? Yeah, I can do like maybe 5 or 6 more minutes if anyone has any good questions for me.
Yep.
Again, I can't talk about any specific projects, of course, even if they're already out, like NDAs or NDAs. But I'm more than happy to talk turkey about loc engineering and all sorts of fun things.
Loc engineering is quite new to the industry. Probably, it is. Localization is very new as well. I don't know outside of Europe, but in Europe, I think it started to you could study localization. It started very slowly, like at least 10 years ago, something a bit or a little over 10 years ago. There were, I think it was in Spain, that universities started to offer like some modules about game localization specifically into
Mm-hmm.
localization translation and translation studies. Now it's been a few years that we kind of see them more and more. I think my
Mm-hmm.
university it started like 10 years ago as well, a bit more over 10 years. So yeah, it's the issue with something that is very new. Is like, yep, you have to find your way yourself to get there.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how over the next 5 or 10 years, we see the localization industry shift, especially when it comes to like AAA.
Mm,
Whether AAA studios decide to invest in localization and start hiring more in-house teams.
mm,
I know there are some companies like Japanese to English will have an in-house English team,
yeah.
but then outsource like European languages, or outsource maybe their Asian languages.
Mm,
So it would be really great to see more of these AAA studios being like, hey, we have a whole in-house French team. We have a whole in-house like Latin Spanish team. Um, or a whole in-house team to handle all of our different languages. I would love to see that. Again, it's cost prohibitive. Like it's
yeah.
always cheaper to go through the LSP than to hire somebody, locally who maybe is a localization specialist in those language
Mm,
pairs. But I think the benefit that having an in-house team provides is so much more important. And I mean, I experienced that firsthand kind of at SEGA. Even though we were separated by a complete ocean, like we would have to wait to the evening to call the devs or to call the project managers and whatnot. Being able to work internally instead of through like an LSP,
mm,
was super helpful. So
yeah.
I think I would love to see that. I have not very high hopes, but I really
Mm.
hope to see it.
Yeah, like you say, it can cost a lot. So that means not all studios can afford to have someone full time dedicated to localization. Maybe it
I
could
mean,
be
they could if they
easier.
paid their CEOs a little bit less.
There is that too.
Don't get me
Depends.
started.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe the smaller studios, it would be harder to find someone and have them
Yeah.
full time. But the others, maybe there's something to do, like having maybe someone as a specialist or engineer on site
Hmm.
that can help you, that can coordinate also with the linguists if they have the time as
Right.
well. But because for
Right.
a
Or
project
barring
manager,
that,
mm,
yeah, like having LSPs that instead of farming things out to a large wet network of contractors, like an LSP that has specialization, that has full-time
mm,
translators and linguists that can be on call to talk to devs that are, obviously paid benefits and, treated more as members of the company than a freelancer that, has to do a certain amount per day, and then if they don't, then things are not good. So it'll be interesting to see kind of where things go. Um, Hopefully, fingers crossed. I'm really excited to see. I know the video game like unionization movement has only really just started, kind of
mm,
like in places like Blizzard, and a couple of other smaller studios. I can't remember the names, but it'll be interesting to see over the next 5 to 10 years how that affects developers.
mm,
As we see maybe Blizzard or maybe some of the other companies start to unionize, and then from there, how does that affect people who are who are being paid as contractors? I know, kind of not in the same game development, but in Japanese to English, the Seven Seas corporation or company, their workers just voted to unionize,
mm,
and one of their tenets that they're working with is like not only do they want better pay for themselves, but they want better pay for their freelancers.
okay.
Which is huge because usually as a freelancer you have to negotiate your own rates.
Mm,
So having a union who fights not only just for themselves as full-time employees, but also for the contractors they work with, it'll be very interesting to see how this kind of union bug that's starting to sweep through at least the United States starts to affect larger publishers and how that will in turn affect localization professionals. So it'll be very interesting to see. I have really high hopes.
Julia has a
Julia
question.
got me a question. Yeah. Do I think having engineering skills gives me better job opportunities and upward mobility? Yeah, absolutely. I think having any additional skills or expertise is always great to have on your resume. It puts you above other people
Mm,
in terms of skill sets. Um, being able to engineer stuff and make the U work faster. Obviously, if you could do more work in a short amount of time because you're engineering stuff, that makes you look really good. That can also help you with upward mobility. But I think it also gives you more insight. Like working as a loc engineer was great for me as I moved into a more of a producer role, because I knew I was more interconnected with developers as I was coding all these kind of specialized systems to work with their game. So I would ask them, how are you making your game? How are you, creating these files? Where do these variables come from? Like, tell me more about your production process. And just by understanding that process more, just kind of through the lens of engineering, helped me so much when I moved more into a producer or project management role, because when the dev said, oh, we can't do this or we can't do this, it was much easier for me to push back and be like, actually, talk to this developer because I know that they can do this. Or, you know what, I think we can engineer a solution because I have in the past. Let me talk to somebody who can figure things out. Because, again, a lot of developers aren't aware of the things that we can do, like in localization or in engineering. So I think just having that knowledge, the knowledge and the experience working with devs gave me a huge step up moving into the producer role. Just because, the more you know, the easier it is for you to devise solutions. And that's really, project management is all about devising solutions and making sure everything is done on time. So
yeah, that's true. Sometimes, yeah, as a translator, maybe it's more like feeling like giving up translation. But if you enjoy all the other aspects, I think it can be very rewarding as an experience. Always learning a few stuff along the way.
Always. There's always something new to learn.
Exactly. I don't see any other questions for now. So anyway, if you have any questions, we have a Discord server that you can join. You just have to contact me or Julia. All the links are in the description below. And we can continue, like if you have other questions, maybe you can just pop by the AMA channel. There is a dedicated text channel there that people can ask questions. So if you have time, have a look around and just answer them if there is anything. And
and I'm in the channel, so you can feel free to at me as well.
Yeah, and we'll try to add all the links you mentioned as well, so people can bookmark them and start to learn or to deal with regular expressions, Python, and everything else. So that could be fun.
Regular expressions. Okay, yeah. Python's great though. I love Python. It's very fun to learn, and it's very versatile.
Okay, well noted. So translators, you know what you have to do. Learn a new language, not the one you thought, but learn a new language. It's always fun. Okay, so thank you very much for being our guest. It was super interesting, and I hope people learned a lot about engineering and in general for localization. And I hope you had a good time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've always loved talking about localization. Like, I get to geek out about it a little bit. Some people in my family, like, I'm going to go to Thanksgiving. I'm not going to be able to talk about any of this because they're all going to be like, oh, that's neat. So I really enjoyed being here. Thanks for having me. And yeah, if you have any more questions for me, feel free to post them in the Discord at EMA channel. You can always reach out to me on Twitter as well. We'll see if Twitter's around. But yeah, and then, of course, I have my website. So yeah, perfect. Absolutely. Please reach out. And yeah, have a great time.
Thank you, and thank you everyone, and see you next time. Bye bye.